to introduce two old friends of EHS. Hello, and welcome to the Safety Leadership Conference presentation, ISO 45001, Understanding and Implementing the Standard. We encourage you to interact with today's speakers and each other in the Q&A chat to your right. Today, I'm pleased and honored to introduce two old friends of EHS today in the Safety Leadership Conference. We have Edwin Folk Jr. and Tom Sesich. Ed is a partner at Fisher Phillips Law Firm, president of Fisher Phillips Safety Solutions, the former head of OSHA under President George W. Bush, and, as if that's not enough, he's also one of the founders of this Safety Leadership Conference. Joining Ed is Tom Sesich. Tom is president of TFC Associates, strategic board advisor to Adveta, and a former president of the ASSE. Their full bios can be found by clicking on the speaker profiles below. With that, I'm now going to sit back and turn it over to Ed Folk and Tom Sesich. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Sounds good. You want to say hello first, Tom, since I'll be taking over?
Well, Ed and I are going to split this. Ed's got the first half and I have the second. So, Ed, go ahead, take it away, my friend.
Yeah, let's go ahead to the next slide. And I'm hoping that many of the people, well, I guess the first thing I want to talk about is just thanking everybody for the commitment to safety and health. And I know attending the program by EHS today, their Safety Leadership Conference, that demonstrates your commitment to safety and health. So I want to say thank you, because a lot of safety professionals don't get that recognition that they do. And so, although one thing I think has been a positive thing, if there's been any positive out of the pandemic, is that I think the safety profession now is being much more relied upon by the C-suite. And so I think that's a very positive thing, and hopefully that will continue long after the pandemic is gone. So, I put this quote, and I saw this quote by one of my favorite coaches, Vince Lombardi: winning is not a sometimes thing, it's an all times thing, and so is safety. And what we're going to be talking about today about ISO 45001 really fits into to this idea about having safety as an all-time thing. So I put this other quote in here. I love quotes, to be quite honest there, but I use a lot of them in my presentations. But I saw this one by Yogi Berra, and when I saw that, it made me think that, this applies to safety too. If you don't know where you're going, you might wind up someplace else. And if we don't know where we are going in our safety journey, or what we're trying to achieve from utilizing our safety program for our companies, what we're going to have is we're not going to have much, is what we're going to end up having. And we're going to end up someplace else. And unfortunately, that someplace else usually means that some employees get either seriously injured or killed. So that's why I put that quote in here too, because 45001 is going to tell you how, it's going to help you know exactly where you're going, and it's going to continue to help you refine everything. So let's go to the next slide. I'm excited to be involved in the ISO 45001, and I'll just mention this. The reason I've been so focused on 45001 is I was on the the U.S. ISO 45001 Technical Advisory Group to help write the standard. Now, as you'll see, there's a lot of countries that have been involved, over about 130 or 140 countries that were involved in the writing of the standard, and that's why it took so long. But anyway, what ISO 45001 is it directs top management of the company to implement a company-wide safety and health program. And why this is different, and we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about 18001 and a couple other things. Why this is so much different is it's a risk-based standard. It's focusing on where safety actually has been going over the last 5 to 7 years, maybe longer. We're looking at a kind of a risk-based type of system, but it really is intended to drive safety in a continuous model, a continuous improvement model, and that's what all ISO standards have that idea, and we'll talk more about showing how this is a continuous improvement model. But it really is the focus of responsibility leadership-wide ISO 45001 is not just for the safety professionals to handle, okay? It was intended to mainly drive safety across the entire company, starting at the upper, what we call top management. That's one of the terms that you're going to see when you're dealing with ISO 45001. There's a whole bunch of different new terms that you need to become a little familiar with, and one of them is top management. Because when you talk about workers, which is the broad term, they talk about workers and other interested parties, and I think Tom will be talking more about that. When you look at that, that intent was to cover everybody, including upper management. So then we had to make a distinction between workers, which covers all the employees, all supervisors, managers, and everybody else, and then from what we call top management, i.e. the people that are going to be at the top, developing, making sure that this program is fully implemented. And like I say, this is a leadership-wide taking thing. So it's going to include employees and what we call, another new term is other interested parties. And you're going to see as we get into that and discuss that, this is a very broad term. It covers it doesn't cover all the employees, which is covered by workers. It says other interested parties. So this standard is intended to cover contractors, vendors, suppliers, public, if they're on your site, and also employees, employers outside your fence. It is a very interesting how we develop it, how it ended up being developed is really going to help companies dramatically improve this. And one of the things I'm so excited about this 45001 is as companies get into it, they're going to be able to reduce their injuries and illnesses to an extent that has never been seen before. So now when we were developing this specific performance criteria and we talk at an OSH system design, we wanted to make sure that small companies, the idea was this standard has to be such that it's not just for the big boys and girls. This is also for the small boys and girls. And the small companies can also become ISO 45000 certified, and because it balances and trying to streamline it so based on the complexity of their safety and health system. So obviously big companies are going to have a more comprehensive OHS system, where where the smaller employers won't be able to, or won't need to, but they'll still be covering all the requirements and all the bases of the standard itself. So let's go to the next slide, Tom. One of the things that it talks about here, the different, and Tom's going to probably talk a little bit more about some of the ISO standards. There are several standards out there that we were examining when we were looking at this whole thing. And one of them was ISO 14001, which most of you probably are familiar with as the environmental standard. We also were looking at 9001, which is the quality standard. So you're going to see the charge from ISO, and ISO is based in Europe. The charge was to make sure that we also harmonized the standard 45001 to the standards that were out there, particularly for 9001, 14001. So let's go to the next slide. So like I said, there was no ISO standard for safety and health management prior to 2018. That's when the standard became effective, as you can see at the very bottom there. We started, what was out there at the time was the OHSAS. I always had trouble saying that. OSSAAS 18,001, which is a British standard. Now, as you can see, when it got published, a decision was made that 18,001 was going to disappear in 3 years. So the time period is coming up for it to disappear. It's actually been extended a little bit now, but there was a lot of companies that were in 18,001 over in Europe. 18,001 was very popular in Europe, very popular in Canada, very popular over in New Zealand and Australia, and somewhat a little bit into in Japan and Korea. But it was not it was a system that I had reviewed when I was at OSHA. When I was head of OSHA, I was putting together I wanted to have a voluntary safety health management system that was available to all employers. And I reviewed the 18,000 along with Z10, which is the U.S. Management system. And I just felt like, that was the reason I got involved with actually being on the technical advisory group, really wanted to really beef that up. So we did that. So in 2013 is when they ISO created the tag groups for all the countries to start developing the standard. And 5 years later, it took us 5 years. Of course, when you're dealing with that many countries, it's not unusual. But and like I said, we were using we looked at a number of different standards as the development basis for developing 45,001. Let's go to the next slide. Why should we care about having a voluntary global standard? Well, because it does help with respect to domestic and international trade, because now we kind of have a universal measuring stick as to how companies are. It sets a set of standards that are understood by everyone. So if you're contracting with a company in India or Brazil, and they're 45,001 certified, you're going to understand that they are familiar with all the different aspects of safety and health and the risk management focus that is there. So you're going to be able to. So also certification in ISO standards does give a selling point. A lot of company businesses talk about, when their salespeople are out there, they're going to talk about, hey, we're ISO 9001 certified in quality. We're ISO, and for the sustainability model, they're going to be talking about, hey, we're also ISO 14001 certified in environmental. These are clearly our selling points for companies. And in fact, there are some companies that if you're not 9001 or 14001, you're not going to be able to. You're going to find it more difficult to be able to get business. So because companies are looking at these, they want to have it. They know that they want to have a set company that has a focus on improving their overall systems, and that's very important. Let's go to the next slide. Like I said, it's an internationally recognized safety health management system, and it should say risk management system because it is much focused on that. Over 70 countries, actually, by the time we got finished, we had a lot more, but when we first started developing, about 70 countries involved. It is the gold standard for occupational safety and health management systems. And as I mentioned, ISO 45001 is going to be replacing 18001 in 2021. I'm trying to remember. I saw that they had extended the cutoff date because of the pandemic. So I don't know if that's going to roll over into 2022, but we'll see. Anyway, let's go to the next slide. Okay. One of the reasons why you want to be certified, well, if you're working in Europe, the European governments are very much are encouraging ISO 45001 certification. I don't know if they'll ever get to the point where they will actually direct companies or certain size companies to be ISO 45001, but they have been doing it. So if you're owned by a European company, you're probably already been talked to, or at least told that you need to start looking at 45001 to figure out how you're going to prepare to get certified on that. And also the Europeans are directing their direct vendors and suppliers and contractors to become certified. And the reason I know this, I have a good client I work with. They're a very large textile manufacturing company and chemical manufacturing company located here and headquartered here located in South Carolina, headquartered in South Carolina. But I got a call. I've been working with their safety, their VP of safety for years now, but and we've been talking about the ISO 45001 once I got on the committee. And one day, this was about it must have been about 8-9 months ago now. I get a call from him and he says, we need to talk more about this 45001. I said, well, I'm happy to talk about it. We can talk about where you need to go, how we can start doing the steps to start implementing or making sure that you have the things you need to have in place to be able to get the certification. I said, why, is there something driving this? And he said, well, I just got off the phone with my CEO and company president, who had just got off the phone with one of their big clients in Europe. And the president of that company had asked the president of my client, when they were going to be getting into 45001, get the 45001 certification. So they're looking at these things now. In addition to the Europeans, you're already seeing a lot of the companies in Asia, particularly in Japan and Korea, starting to move into the 45,001. In the United States, it's kind of, I think, a slow start, but this is not unusual for the United States, unfortunately. So I don't know if you remember back when I first started practicing law back in 1978. Yes, I'm an old guy. There's no doubt about it. But anyway, when I started there, and I was working with different companies, all the rage was quality circles. And then they're talking about 9001. It was just huge. And the interesting thing was, and why was it all of a sudden this big interest in quality circles and 9001? Well, it's because all of a sudden the Japanese were just kicking our butts, so to speak, on quality, and it was impacting sales in the United States, sales on companies, U.S.-based companies. And and it all came down from Philip Deming. But the irony of the whole thing is Deming developed his quality model and tried to sell it to the companies in the United States, and no one would take it. No one was interested in them. And so he went over to Japan, and they just went crazy over it. And as a result, all of a sudden, the quality of their products all throughout all Japan became huge. And then all of a sudden, the United States, the people in the companies in the United States started saying, well, what's going on here? And that's what's going on. That's what's happening. So it seems like the United States has always kind of lagged behind on different ISO standards. But I think you're going to see a lot of companies going to be changing over in the next several years. Let's go to the next slide, Tom. If you're a publicly traded company, you'll be very interested from a PR and a sustainability perspective. ISO 45001 actually has a section dealing with sustainability. And we're very much focused on that, and and making this part of the the sustainability model, from safety being part of the sustainability model. Because if one of the things, this is one of the areas, unfortunately, that the safety profession kind of got behind, so the speaker got left behind. We have with respect to sustainability really, if you look at most companies, it's talking about environmental issues. What you put in the air, what you put in the water, what you put in the ground. That's really the focus on the sustainability stuff. But the question becomes to me, I've always thought, is, why would you care what you put in the air, what you put in the water, and what you put in the ground if you don't care about how safe your employees are? So we, as a safety profession, should have been right there with the environmentalist people, the green people, saying, yes, we're believing in sustainability, but we're also talking about sustainability of our employees as an asset to the company and an asset to the country. And what we did. But what we have seen, and we're starting to see now more and more companies are starting to put safety as part of their overall sustainability model. So we need to be looking, that's one of the things that you're going to be seeing. But when we put that sustainability provision in there, and we're talking about, it's a very interesting provision. When you look at it, it also talks about some things about, there's actually a section dealing with bullying. Now you're going to say, oh my God, Ed, how does bullying apply to safety? And why is it in ISO 45001? When you specific, you're going to see the word bullying in the ISO 45001 standard. And the reason we did that was because one of the things we saw with respect to all this idea about sustainability, protecting employees in the workplace, we saw, when we had a meeting, we actually had a face-to-face meeting. We had lots of phone meetings, but once a year we'd have a face-to-face meeting of the technical advisory group for the U.S. And when we did that, it turned out that one of the, just several weeks before that, there was an incident where an employee had been being bullied by another employee at work, and that employee got so fed up, went out to his car, got his gun, came back and shot the guy. And that's why bullying is in the ISO 45001 standard, because it was just that focus, that whole idea about we got to protect employees from all types of things, and tie it into this whole sustainability idea. So. And of course, the companies that are in the OSHA VPP program, the Voluntary Protection Program, are going to have to be looking to kind of upgrade. I think you're going to see a lot of those companies switch over to the ISO 45001. because first of all, they already have a lot of things in place that they need to have in place. It is a much more, ISO 45001 is more robust than the VPP. I mean, it is, and I'm going to try to sugarcoat anything on that, but it is more robust. The VPP was always kind of thought to be a continuous improvement model, but really here, it's not the designated continuous improvement that 45001 has. I mean, you're going to be doing continuous improvement in 45001. So I think you're going to see a lot of companies that are in VPP, and because also that OSHA has not been able to, has had a real difficulty having the funding necessary to be able to keep growing the program. So I think you're going to see that. So I think you're going to see migration of companies in VPP to the 45001 over the next several years. All right, you want to go next? Okay, all right. Why do it? Also, it has a positive impact on corporate culture. We're going to be moving from a correction mode, i.e. we have an accident and then we try to figure out what happened and try to make sure it doesn't happen again, to a prevention mode. This is the risk aspects of it. This is where we're talking about risk management, prevention. We're identifying the problems that we're going to be, identify the safety and health risks that are out in your facility or whatever work site, whatever project is, it could go with anything, how we're going to get to that. It improves management oversight on the program. Because now the top management. Remember, I told you there's a difference between upper management, top management, and the standard. When you're talking about workers or top management. Top management is going to be much more involved and have to have a great more involvement in it. So we're going to be seeing more improved management oversight in the program too. It's going to be more measurable key performance indicators are going to be out there. You're going to see much more because you're going to have to be measuring not only when you set up your performances and determine what your goals are and everything on the program. At the end of each year, you're going to be measuring that to determine what did you achieve, what you did not achieve, and then that's part of the continuous improvement. You're going to start doing new metrics, new goals in order to achieve your goals that you hadn't obtained and any new goals you want. It's going to also show that you had due diligence. If you're in 45001, I think it's going to be extremely hard for OSHA to come in and issue a willful violation. Now, if you just plain out know that you have a safety hazard and you don't do anything about it, yeah, you're going to get a willful violation. But here you're going to have everything in place and the continuous improvement as you do that's going to give you that due diligence. And by having this continuous improvement, that's going to show that to your employees and your vendors and suppliers that you are really committed to safety and health. So, and as I say, you're going to have greater top management, but it is upper management involved in understanding safety. This is not, like I say, this is not the safety department handling all this stuff. Upper management, top management is going to have to sign off things. They're going to have the commitment and involvement in that they've not had in the past. And it's going to get, once again, like I talked before about the pandemic, I'm hoping that this ISO 45001 is going to give much more visibility to the safety profession. Okay, Tom, I'm going to go next slide. It's also going to lower probability of potential civil and criminal liability because you're going to be having the things in place you need to have. It's going to also provide new tools to be able to prove the significant return on investment that safety has to the company. It is going to have, once I say, a positive impact on corporate culture. It's going to improve production and quality. Because once again, when I talk about involvement here, we're also talking, excuse me, we're talking about involvement of not just the safety department. As I said, this is not just the safety department. It is going to be, you're going to have production involved, maintenance involved, quality involved, environmental involved. All these different groups are going to be involved, but particularly for the first time. Now, when you think about this, when you're going to have, as part of the risk management analysis here, when you're doing the risk hazard assessments there, you're going to be sitting down with the production people and the quality people and the maintenance people, and they're all going to be sitting, okay, what are our risks? What do we have problems with? Where can we have potential problems? And what are the risks? And when we identify these safety and health risks and show that if we don't address these, what could happen? Well, somebody might get hurt. A machine something might happen, and as a result, machine is not being properly taken care of or whatever, and as a result, somebody gets hurt. But it also stops production. Now, production understands, the people in production always say, well, yeah, I can't have that. I can't have a machine down. I can't have a department down. I can't have the plant down because of this safety risk that we've not addressed. So now we have buy-in from production. We have buy-in from maintenance. We have buy-in from quality, because quality, they say, yeah, if the machines are not working properly, I can't have good quality. So now everybody's buying in, and that was the whole idea about 45,001, is to increase buy-in. Okay, it was going to increase profitability because of all that. It's going to have, and it's going to, you're going to meet the legal regulatory requirements, because there's a section on legal requirements that says you got to be in full compliance with all the safety and health regulations. All right, let's go, Tom. Keep going. We got to keep going. Let's say we're going to demonstrate our concern for the welfare of our employees. We're going to improve the efficiency and consistency of our internal operations, because now everybody's working together. We're not siloed anymore. We're working together. So, like I say, it's going to increase productivity, improve quality. We're going to, and as a result, we're going to have operational excess. We're going to be more profitable. We're going to be more competitive. Okay, next slide. It's also going to have a great impact on your company image. You know, BP, BPP, they get a lot of, one of the big things is they get a lot of publicity, good public image from being a BPP site. Same thing's going to happen here with 45,001. And so, like I said, you're going to improve your recognition and reputation among your clients and contractors, suppliers, and vendors, because they know that you're committed to safety. And you're probably going to be pushing it down to your vendors and suppliers and contractors too. And so it's going to help meet clients' goals that they have, that you have world-class safety and sustainability, so they can count on you to be there all the time. So, next slide. Okay. I mentioned about this ISO. ISO stands for International Organization of Standards. It's located in Geneva, Switzerland. It's an independent non-governmental organization. They have thousands of ISO standards, voluntary ISO. These are voluntary standards. They're not. Although I think over in Europe, you're going to see people, governments being kind of requiring certain size companies to have these things. So, let's go to the next slide. ANSI, as you're familiar with, is the American National Society Institute, and we have ANSI standards. Now, the Z10, which was when we were developing this standard, we looked at Z10, we looked at 18,001, we looked at BPP, I looked at some of the other stuff. Now, one thing I will mention to you, the U.S. standard Z10 has now been harmonized with 45,001. Z10 is not a certification standard. It's an ANSI standard. So you're going to be seeing more of these type of things being involved. Let's go next slide. I think this is where you're taking over, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I was going to jump in here, Ed. As Ed's already spoken, the ISO standards, and by the way, the ISO are global standards and accepted globally. And Ed already alluded to, sometimes in the U.S., we have a not invented here syndrome, and but we have to recognize that it's a global economy, and so these standards are widely accepted around the world, and there's many organizations represented by the people attending today that do business outside the U.S., and that's where it comes into play. It's important to understand that the ISO standards generally are considered conformity standards, and we can use ISO 9001 as an example. It's a quality management system, and it essentially what it does is to ensure that that there are consistent processes producing consistent quality products and services. In other words, a widget produced in Youngstown in the U.S. Using if the organization is in conformance with 9001, that widget is going to be produced the exact same way in China. Now there is a slight danger, because if the widget was designed poorly, basically what 9001 is going to do is if it's going to be produced with a bad defect in Youngstown, 9001 would be, would ensure that it was produced the same way in China, which would have the defect. So we have to understand what these management systems do. They're designed for conformance, and there's feedback loops in the systems to ensure that if there are deficiencies. Those are identified, and there are means for correction. Ed talked about ISO 14001, which is the environmental management system. One of the things that ISO did a few years ago is to recognize there's a lot of different management systems. There's quality, there's environmental, of course now there's safety and health, there's energy management, and they harmonized these standards so that they call them the high-level aspects of the standard, meaning they're all for management, leadership, feedback, continuous process, feedback loops, setting metrics, setting goals. The language is the same across all the standards. Now, the individual components are going to differ, and we'll talk about that in a second. Another lesson that was learned from the environmental standard, which is probably about 20 years old now, when it was first passed, people were looking at, and it looks at environmental impacts, and organizations were looking at where, what kind of impacts they were having to the environment, air, water, waste. But a big problem with the standard, it didn't talk about compliance. So companies were getting certified to the environmental management standard, and then the local government agency would come in and could find compliance violations. Well, that's been corrected in ISO 14001, and that lesson was learned in 45001. So a big part of compliance with ISO 45001, safety and health, is not only a safety management system, but a safety management system that also complies with regulatory requirements. So ISO implementation, it doesn't mandate specific standards. In other words, in 45001, you won't see a lockout tagout standard. You won't see a confined space standard. You won't see specification standards for how to manage your fall protection. What they are is what the standard is a framework for what your management, your safety and health management system looks like. All the components of that system to ensure that the intended outcome, which certainly a prime outcome, will be reduced injuries and illnesses. Now, I'm an industrial engineer by education, so I look at a standard like this beyond the safety and health implications, which are huge. I look at what it does for process efficiency, organizational efficiency. Ed talked about a lot of the other benefits. So, clearly the prime outcome of a safety and health management system is reduce risk, reduce injuries and illnesses, reduce losses. This is probably the best slide and most important slide in our whole presentation. And this is a slide that Ed—
And the hardest to read.
I understand. Well, and Ed and his team put this together, and I can say this. Ed won't say it, because that would be, since he did it, it'd be selfish promotion. But I didn't have anything to do with it, so I can praise Ed and his team for putting it together. I have not seen a slide like this in one shot that summarizes the 45001, and you'll see Ed's phone number and email at the end. If you'd like a copy of this, just drop him a note, reach out to him, and I'm sure he'd be happy to share it. But I'm not going to go through this, point by point, but it just summarizes the whole standard in one slide. Ed talked about W. Edwards Deming and his work in Japan, and basically revitalizing their automotive industry and the quality of their products in the 1950s. He implemented the concept of the Plan, Do, Check Act. You hear about the Deming continuous improvement cycle. And you'll notice that what Ed's team did is they broke out— I think you can follow my cursor here, I hope so. Ed, can you see my cursor moving around?
Yes, we can.
Okay. you'll notice along the top that, it talks about the plan, do, check, act. And these are the sections of the standard that, conform to those components of the Deming continuous process system. And so you'll notice the first part of the system talks about of the standard, talks about the context of the organization. And Ed referred to that, talking about the needs and expectations of workers and other interested parties as a component of that. Let me say one thing, and Ed again referred to this. In this standard, and indeed in almost all new safety and health management standards, whether you're talking about Z10, whether you're talking about OSHA VPP, there's this transition from the use of employees to the use of workers. Meaning, it used to be that, even talk about OSHA and employee and employer law. Realistically, in today's modern economy, the number of people at your facility or the people that you rely on to get the work done, whether it's in services, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in healthcare, whatever field you're in. Realistically, we know that, organizations hire employees, but more and more they hire third parties to do a lot of the work, contractors on site or other third-party companies to manage facilities management, warehousing, security, cafeteria. And this standard, and indeed all the new safety and health management standards, Z10, for example, you don't see the word employees used, it's workers. And the expectation is that the management system will take into account, all the people that your company touch. Now, there's some challenges in that from U.S. labor law, and that's an area Ed can talk about later on. But in the past, you get into the dual employment situation. But the fact is that if people are on your site, whether they're your workers or somebody else's workers, you have some role in protecting those people. And that's recognized, again, not only in this standard, but all standards. But that's a big change when you start seeing the word workers instead of employees. I won't go through, again, all the points, but first thing you have to do is look, what's the context of the organization? What does the safety and health management system need to take into account? Is it workers? Is it, we're talking about contract workers on site? Is it the public? Is it the community? What is it that our system needs to ensure? Do we need to ensure that, if we produce hazardous materials or work with hazardous materials, do we have plans and processes in place for community emergency response? So all of those things are part of your overall management system. Leadership and worker participation. Ed said this is really all aspects of the company. I've got a little bit of a breakdown on some of these, so I won't go into a lot of detail. But the planning component, how do we identify risks? What's our process for identifying the risks in our organizations, and what are objectives and plans to address those? So that's all planning. That's all falls under the general topic of planning. Then the do, how do we actually go ahead and manage this? So we have support. What are the resources, the competencies of the people that are going to make these things happen? Information, communication. How do we document this information? Operation. These are all how are we making the processes work? What is our management of change process? We know that whenever change is occurring, that's a precursor for introducing risk into our system. How do we manage outsourcing, whether it's under our roof or outside our roof? Does our system take into account managing, or not managing, but ensuring that the people that we do business with, are reputable, that they protect their workers, and they ensure our continuity of supply. We have a stake in the game if they blow their plants up. So, what's our role in that? And we define that. I mean, the standard doesn't define that. It doesn't say you have to do this, you have to do this. But it does force us in implementing the standard to make that determination. What do we want to do? What is our role? What are our procurement processes? How do we manage contractors? What are our emergency response processes? And then the check function is, after we've said, here's all the things we're going to do in sections 7 and 8, how do we ensure we're doing them? How do we actually measure ourselves? How do we review? How are we doing? And then the act portion is, once we review how we're doing, if we know if we've had an incident or we found nonconformity, what's our corrective action? How do we make improvement? What do we fix? How can we fix? What do we fix? How do we fix it? And then we start this cycle over. It's a continuous improvement cycle. It's understood that you don't get from 0 to 60 in even 1 year. These things take, the continuous improvement process works over a period of time. So again, this is kind of the overview of the standard itself. And I would encourage you to reach out to Ed to get a copy. If you're trying to explain it to someone, this is a great slide for doing it in a relatively short period of time. We're just going to cover 3 big points of what you just saw. Ed talked about this, but we have to stress it, that number 1 is that this is a system that, the management system is owned by top management. It's not owned by safety. So, and top management is a person or a group of people who direct or control the organization. The entire management team owns this. It's not delegated. The management system itself is not delegated to the safety manager or a specific person, no more than ensuring that your organization makes profit is delegated to the finance department. The finance department doesn't make or sell a thing. All they do is measure. So just like the financial performance of your organization is not delegated to the finance department, the safety function of your safety performance of your organization is not delegated to the safety manager. I remember and this goes back many years, I was the safety supervisor of a chemical plant, and the whole system, it was, we had a good system, support by the plant manager, terrific support, but the expectation was that it was my program as the safety supervisor. And again, I had a lot of people that supported it, but I changed jobs. I went to another company, and I kept getting calls from my old company saying, how does this work? How do we make that work? Why was that so successful? Can you come back next weekend and work with us help us understand how the system's working? And I said, you guys understand I don't work there anymore, right? I mean, seriously. But the point was, we didn't have a robust management system. It was my system that plant management was happy to delegate to me, as opposed to it being their system. So if one person leaves, whoever is the staff person can step right in. So that's what a management system does for you. We've already talked about it. 45,001 requires worker participation at multiple levels. Let me just say, and we talk about the ISO standards, one significant difference of ISO standards is how, in most parts of the world, standards are set. And it's different from the United States in general. You go to Europe and start setting standards. They have a system called a tripartite system, which means that they view of equal responsibility for the employer, management, workers, employees, and government. So when you have standards and ISO standards fall under this general umbrella, these standards are developed with equal representation by those 3, by management, by labor, and by government. And so you can expect, and not just for political reasons, let's face it, workers are the people that are on the front line. They're the ones getting hurt. Your senior managers aren't getting hurt, it's the workers. And so it just makes good sense that good practice that workers are involved. And so there are different sections in this standard that refer back. It says, one section, 5.4, says that There must be processes for consultation and participation of workers or worker representatives, whether they're unions or in a non-union facility. Some method has to be set for communicating with workers. What are some of their issues? From a policy standpoint, from objectives. Certainly when there's corrective actions associated with incidents. Now, what that participation, here's the key with these management systems, what that participation looks like is not defined. It doesn't say you have to have safety committees, you have to have, a worker on your daily manufacturing planning meetings, or it doesn't, it's a performance standard. It doesn't tell you how that you obtain worker participation. It just says you have to have a system that ensures that workers have a voice and can have their opinions known. Beyond that, you decide how your process is going to make that happen. And so, that's kind of how these management systems work. They're not specific. It says you have to have workers involved. It doesn't tell you how to do it. Obviously a facility that's represented by a union is probably going to do it differently than an organization that's not represented by a union, just the way you interact differently with employees. So, but the point is you have to have that worker participation. And then the third part, and some of this is the change, these are changes that are in 45,001 that we haven't seen in other management systems. And that's really a focus on understanding risks and identifying hazards and ultimately classifying your risk. And it's broader. Ed talked about the bullying, and some of this is more based on global trends. Like I said, in the United States, we have this not invented here syndrome, and we think our way is the best way. I used to work for a British pharmaceutical company that I had global responsibilities, and I'd see different emphasis in different parts of the world. And at that time, I thought our fire protection systems were better in the States, our standards. I thought the machine guarding standards were better in Europe. So different areas of the world stress different things. And in Europe and certainly in other parts of the world, but started in Europe, there was a real strength on, use the term mental ill health associated with work. Social factors, psychosocial factors associated with stress at work, are taken into account, and in Europe are recordable and compensable. And so, a global standard is at least going to consider some of those factors. So just as Ed said, harassment and bullying, we might say, well, hey, that's not a big deal in the United States. Europe does their thing. Hey, let's be honest about it. If you say, what's the leading cause of occupational fatalities in the U.S., number one is roadway accidents. Makes sense. And number two and number three tend to flip. Some years falls are number two, some years falls are number three, some